Washoe County Library System welcomes you to our monthly series from the Nevada Historical Society presents High Noon with Neal Cobb. This afternoon's topic is the history and legends of the Brotherhood of E Clampus Vitus with Clamper historian Tim Pearce. My name is Jennifer, and I'm happy to be here with you today. And now I would like to introduce Christina Hornback with the Nevada Historical.
Hi, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much to the Washoe County Library System and Neal Cobb. We appreciate the collaboration for bringing great programming to our community. Thank you again to the community for helping us celebrate our 120 years. We're very excited to host you if you want to come into the museum and see us as well. And now I'd love to turn it over to our long-term supporter of the NHS, Neal Cobb.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Christina. Our speaker today, Clamper historian Tim Pearce, came to Reno in 1964 from the Midwest with his parents and grew up in a small suburb adjacent to the airport. As an adult working in the construction industry, he met numerous individuals that belonged to E Clampus Vitus. Tim finally took the big step some 23 years ago and joined the Brotherhood. With a passion for history and a deep appreciation for the hard-working man when things weren't so easy. It was the perfect match. Tim spent a lot of time heading up projects improving the Clamper building up in Virginia City. Many of the friendships were made during this time. Stories were told, history was spoken, and the best understand it. And all is true because clampers never lie to each other. I want to focus on that. This insight of clamperdom bestowed upon Tim has brought him to the point of wanting to share the mystic origins and the legends of the Brotherhood of E Clampus Vitus. High Noon welcomes Mr. Tim Pearce.
Thank you, Neal. I appreciate the intro. This will be my first time here on Nevada Historical Society, and I'm going to just jump right in and get started. The current E Clampus Vitus is a current fraternal organization dedicated to the preservation of history. We currently have 50 active chapters throughout the Western United States. This would include Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, Montana, Idaho, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. We have 3 outposts, which are potential chapters, trying to become full-fledged chapters. We also have a mythical chapter in New Mexico, named after the mythical lost city of gold known as Quivira. Our initiated membership is throughout Clamperdom is around 350,000 people. This would include the dead. Once you're a clamper, you're always a clamper. ECV's membership grows every year. E Clampus Vitus was developed primarily as an organization for men that weren't qualified to join fraternal organizations such as the Freemasons and the Independent Order of Oddfellows. Today, the Clampers can be considered a historical drinking society or a drinking historical society. They're both correct. What we may do, we are sure to have a great time at it. Members of ECV pay no annual dues. We are all officers of equal indignity. All of our money is raised by sales of t-shirts, pins, patches, and other clothing. Since we identify each other's membership by the clothing we wear, we never sell anything to a non-member, the exception being a clamper's wife or girlfriend, known as a widow. We also have raffles and auctions to raise money, and we charge for our events. We use this money for a variety of causes, but our primary cause is the preservation of history. We do this by placing plaques at historical sites. One can see all of our One can see plaques all over the West mounted by the clampers, but you'll find the highest concentration in California and parts of Nevada. California has the oldest existing chapters, which after dying out in the late 1800s became a revival, or the revivius in the 1930s. Nevada chapters are around 60 years old, which brings us around to the history of the Ancient and Honorable Order of ECV. Dr. Reverend Shaw, a missionary in China, made an important discovery in finding a manuscript dated back at least 200 years BC. This date is kind of disputed. We know because converting BC and AD to the Chinese years is a little bit difficult. And it could have been as soon as 435 AD. In this manuscript, it is proved without a doubt that a great navigator and owner of a junk, Eli, discovered America in 217 BC. We'll stick with that number. This disputes the claims of the Norsemen, which even their name is not fully agreed upon. Even those who disagree with the 217 years and agree with the 435 AD, that's still a 600-year lead over the Vikings. During a trading journey in February 217, let's call it 217 BC, Eli's junk got caught in a Eli was a great navigator. Eli's junk got caught in a storm and it drove it far out to sea when the storm subsided. He decided to steer west and again reach the coast of China. It is well known the mariner's compass was in full use by Chinese sailors even at this early date. Eli's junk was infested with Yangtze bugs, which are similar to cockroaches, and one of them got into the compass, wedged himself under the needle, and after a struggle died. The cockroach had turned the compass needle about 180 degrees before doing so. Instead of sailing west to China, Eli went directly east, having absolute faith in the compass, which had saved him so many times in the fog and other storms. Thun, one of the crewmen, who I don't have a photo of, woke up after viewing the sunrise, suggested that they might be going in the wrong direction. Eli had him thrown overboard. After months of sailing, Eli landed on the shores of what was to become Gumshan to the Chinese, for the present day, which is the present day California. In his own journal, Eli and his crew of 10 men stayed a while, learned the native language. He found the natives steeped in ignorance and took it upon himself to teach the rule of conduct laid down by E Clampus Vitus and Kung Fu Zi, otherwise known as Confucius. Eli's confusion was cleared when the Yangtze bug was found. He struck out for China and he died some 20 years later. Dr. Shaw's discovery was printed in the New York Daily Tribune, September 10th, 1890. The second Chinese voyage happened at about the same time. Eli was in Gumshan. Even though they knew nothing about sailing, about 300 slave girls mutineered and were sailing the ship. Due to some indelicate names that are also in our initiation rituals, I can't really divulge much of this voyage. The gist of it is 300 slave girls who were sailed to America. They had a mutiny and they used opium that they found in the hold to overcome the eunuchs that were guarding them. They killed all the male leaders. It was said, Hop Me, the leader of the mutiny, and the slave girls found that they landed in the Monterey area also. Nature took its course. The slave girls stayed in California for fear of retribution. And they had met Eli and his 10 crew members, or actually 9, and nothing was heard of them again. It was the 15th day of June in the year 304 that our venerated patron, St. Vitus, at the age of 12, was boiled in a vat of oil with with a rooster by order of Roman Emperor Diocletian. He had, as we know, just written the first three words of a great treatise, Credo quia absurdum, I believe because it is absurd. This ridiculous doctrine, the great faith, founded upon absurdity, which carried on and spread throughout the world by the shape of his followers. Of these were two branches. The first religious order of St. Vitus and the Vituscan fathers had the glory of carrying on the credo eastward and into Asia at the very heart of China. The other branch of the order worked westward and was called the Dumbbellican Brotherhood. They were also known as the Frolicking Friars. For centuries, along with the religious duties, the Frolicking Friars took it upon themselves to console widows by the absence of or neglect of their husbands. This led to the New World. It was well known how they accompanied the conquistadors Cortez and Pizarro. The Spanish swashbucklers created widows by the thousand, taxing the strength of even the most hardened frolicking friar. The friars took place in the conquest of the New World, following the conquistador and enjoying the spoils of war. And then until they came across a band of Indians in Arizona who called themselves the Clampus. The Clampus was a fierce tribe and made sign that for some reason the friars understood. They were direct descendants of Heli and his crew. The Clampus didn't know this and relentlessly killed every one of the friars that also knew the teachings of St. Vitus. There's a monument that marks this scene of the massacre. It says, "Here fell the last of the frolicking friars. They could pass it up, but they couldn't take it." The Quivira chapter is accumulating proof that BCV spread into the US from Mexico. This brings us to more modern times. But other than a few newspaper articles, little is written about the 19th century clapper Ephraim B. He was born in 1799 or 1801, one of the two. Two different sources quote three different dates. He had 11 siblings. After his father died, no wonder why, Ephraim was bound to a blacksmith where he worked hard and set out on his own in just 3 years. In 1822, he set up his first blacksmith business in what became to be known as West Union City, in what would later become West Virginia. He soon married and had 10 children with his first wife. She died in 1852, no wonder why. He married the second wife the following year and had 7 more children. Ephraim had had his first child at 22 and his last at 64. There's a lot of bees in West Virginia. Along with his excellent blacksmith business, he started a tavern known as the Beehive Inn, which was extremely popular. The Beehive, at the very least, was aptly named. Ephraim loved good jokes and especially practical jokes. It was in the spring of 1845 that two events coincided that brought an idea to Ephraim. In the winter of 1844-1845, Caleb Cushing, U.S. Commissioner to China, returned to the U.S. from a 17-month journey. He had negotiated the Treaty of Shanghai, the first treaty between U.S. and China. Then a story in the Southern newspaper broke out about a hideous monster called the Gaius Vitus. It had been captured in northern Maine and could be seen at a sideshow for a fee. Patrons would pay and be seated as they could see the monster's feet below the stage curtain. It was a partner's feet wrapped in coonskins. Just about the time the show would start, the MC would scream from behind the curtain that the monster was loose. Everyone would run for the door, and when the dust settled, they would find the MC, the partner, and the money all gone. Truth be told, it was a couple of broke Yankees stuck in the South looking to finance their trip home. Ephraim took delight in these two stories. Lodges and fraternal organizations were extremely popular at this time. As a joke, Ephraim had already been spoofing on the rituals of most popular lodges. This is when he landed on the idea of performing the rituals himself and initiating men into an organization. By the end of 1845, he initiated all unqualified working men that would never be allowed into snootier lodges. Ephraim said that through Caleb Cushing, he alone had been contacted by the Grand Hotot, the Emperor of China, and he was alone empowered to be the Grand Scutus, he stole the name, and to pass on the tenets of St. Vitus to the United States. News about the ECB spread fast. The first newspaper articles mentioning ECB were in Brookville, Indiana in 1846, over 300 miles away, and also in Cassopolis, Michigan in late 1846. That was 450 miles away. Some say the initiation rituals were probably perfected in West Union. It was popular not only because of the merits of the order, but also because of secret oath-bound societies that were in vogue at the time. Richmond, Virginia was when ECV rocketed into popularity. Ephraim initiated some of the members of the legislatures. Within a short period of time, the roles of the Richmond branch bore all the August body legislators. This is much like today's ECV day in Carson City at the Nevada State Legislature, where all the male legislators are initiated into ECV by Snowshoe Thompson chapter. ECV became a bigger success than Ephraim ever dreamed. His joke would be. Impromptu ceremonies or initiations were often held when circuit court was in session. ECV spread from county seat to county seat, from town to town. A news article in the Western Union City paper said it's because of his popularity as a lecturer and his sacrificing of time and money, he was being promoted to Grand Lama, Emperor of China, by the Emperor of China. Ephraim was having a good time with his practical joke, and it went to his head. He had illusions of grandeur, and so he naturally went into politics. Even though he had immense recognition, he lost some elections, but he did win a couple. Virginia split into West Virginia. The Beehive became part of the Underground Railroad. The country was at war with itself, and because of the war, most lodges closed and disbanded. In February of 1867, the West Virginia legislature had voted to strike a medal in Ephraim B's honor, and he alone had heard from the Grand Empress of China to begin a ladies' lodges. At the end of that legislative session, Ephraim returned home to live out his days. He died at 86 years old. The Beehive still stands, and if today's clamper goes and visits, he can become a member of that chapter. No ladies' lodges were ever opened. Joseph Zumwalt is credited for bringing ECV to the West. The ritual of E Clampus Vitus had been published in the Bowling Green Journal in Missouri. Joseph obtained a copy. Having heard of the gold strike in 1848 in California, Joseph made quick plans to move to the West, arriving in 1849. He brought the ritual book with him. Joseph and his three sons did rather well in mining. Zumwalt was a natural at it. He used his proceeds to purchase large amounts of property. Mining is exhaustive work, so to relieve the drudgery, attempts were made to start an ECV chapter. After a couple of failures, a chapter was started in 1851 at McCollamy Hill. That would be chapter number 1001. The organization spread quickly through camps, not because of the fun, but it's because of its benevolent nature, taking care of widows, orphans, and minors that were injured or just went bust. In this era, it was a good business if you were a shop owner or businessman to join the clampers. Otherwise, you may starve, no matter what camp you went to. Downeyville and Placerville, also known as Hangtown at the time, were some of the first chapters. The guy would sneak around the alleys of Hangtown during the day blowing on a cue gag or a horn. This alerted all the clampers in town that a new poor blind candidate, or PBC, was to be initiated that night at a prearranged location. When everyone showed, the PBC would be relieved of all of his gold dust, which was quickly turned into liquid assets, and if there was enough dust, a meal for everybody. The initiation would be at the PBC's expense. At that point, he became the star of the show, and he needed a lot of attention. There were times where you just can't get anything right. For a PBC, this is one of those times. After it's all over, he doesn't want to be the last PBC, and he will want to see the show from the other side of the fence. So naturally, he will talk his buddies into joining. At some point, everybody will have a good time. Just maybe not that first night. Clamperton had a good run in California. And I believe there was one chapter in Carson City at the time. But all chapters had died by the end of the century, except for Marysville. They used incorporation papers in 1915, and the remaining directors for that incorporation were found in 1940. It wasn't until 1930 when ECB was thought of again. In 1930, Carl Wheat mentioned to his friend Ezra Dane, "Let's revive ECB." Carl was a remarkable man. Among his accomplishments, he was a World War I vet, had a law degree from Harvard. He was chief counsel of the California Railroad Commission. He worked for the FCC. He was in federal government during World War II, and he was a really great historian. Like Wheat, Ezra Dane also graduated with a law degree from Harvard and wrote extensively about California until his tragic death at age 37 in 1941. There was a third party to this, Leon Wetzel. He was a high official at the Masonic Order. He wrote 100 Years of Freemasonry in California and other stories about California. They had a problem. None of them knew the rituals, and none of them knew the rules. Carl Wheat discovered Adam Lee Moore, who was the last global Grand Noble Humbug or that would be a chapter president of the Sierra City chapter in the 1800s. Moore had an excellent memory and recalled all the words to the initiation ritual, which this is really an amazing thing because the ritual takes I can't tell you, but it's an amazing thing. Moore had been a redshirted miner, a stagecoach driver, among other things in his life. At 94, no one still could keep up with him. He died at the age of 99 in 1947. He was a big part in the Clamper revival. Talking about red shirts, back in the 1800s, to mock other organizations, the Clampers attached pins, ribbons, and badges onto their union suits or one-piece long underwear. They were all dyed red at the time. That's why today's Clampers wear a red shirt, kind of traditionally to identify ourselves to each other. In May of 1932, Chapter Redivivus made its first trek to Camptonville and then on to Downeyville in Sierra City. Carl Wheat became the first Noble Grand Humbug. The Clampers flourished this time. You had to have a keen interest in history. They attracted the era's most respected historians, bibliographers, historical society presidents, journal editors, printers, and collectors in California. In 1939, a Clamp Constitution was adopted, and the Clampers became incorporated. In 1950, Carl Wheat returned from World War II and wrote new bylaws, and in 1954, they were adopted. They created a Grand Council. Here's a list of today's Grand Council. There's 15 proctors, let's call them district managers, and in that 15, there is a Sublime Noble Grand Humbug, a Nameless, and a Sublime Noble Grand Recorder. Grand Council meets in May of every year in Sonora. This is where grievances, disputes, and ideas for the good of the order are tossed about. It's quite the assembly with humbugs, vice humbugs, their wives or girlfriends, which are now known as widows in Clamperdom. Hawkers with various hangabouts are there also. It's a great time. Trash. It was Wheat, Dane, and Witzel who got together and created a. This is about Drake's plaque. It was. Clampers are known for their humor and practical jokes. So I'm going to include this one story here about Drake's plaque. It was Wheat, Dane, and Witzel that got together and created a brass plaque that left California to England. In 1936, it was found in the mud of Drake's Bay, California. It was first found, never cleaned off, and then discarded several miles away from the original site. After 3 more years, it was found again. The plaque had purportedly been posted by Sir Francis Drake in 1579, and it said the Miwok Indian tribe resigned all claim to California and freely signed all right and title to the land. This was given to England, of course, because Francis Drake sailed for England. A Miwok Indian tribe resigned all claim to California. The plaque was made to be an inside joke, but it had quickly broken out in public. The find made the headlines. The plaque was shown in various universities and museums. The threesome tried to tip off the recipient of the joke, but they were ignored. 40 years later, this plaque was shown in museums for 40 years. 40 years later, suspicions once rose about the authenticity of the plaque. In 1977, metal tests were again performed, and it was found to be a forgery. In the meantime, with the urging of a few clampers, the chief of the Miwoks had written a statement to revoke the plaque. It's read as follows: "Be it all known unto all men by their presence and initiative. Whereas in the year 1579, the great Hio of the Miwoks was seduced by that buccaneer Francis Drake to deliver this land of Nova Albion to Queen Elizabeth, ye Queen, and her successors forever. Now, therefore, I, the present chief of Hio, or of the Miwok nation, do now revoke said grant on the grounds of deceit, fraud, and failure to occupy the said domain." This was done in the presence of ECV, May 29, 1937. A copy of this revocation reached the desk of the President of the United States. After reading it, it is said that Roosevelt smiled for the first time in a very long time. Yep, the Clampers, we held the nation together. And there's a reason why California is, and that's the reason why California is still under the glorious flag, the Star-Spangled Banner. You won't find this account in any history books, and the Clampers don't resent this, because they would never blow their own horn about little matters like this. Anyway, yes. As noted earlier, Grand Council, the Grand Council meets every yearly in May, and in Sonora, California. This is, I think I already said that. Oh, I'm into trash. Trash stands for Trans Roisterous Assembly of Senior Humbugs. It was started in 1975 by Marsh Fay and Carl Briggs. Only humbugs or ex-humbugs are allowed on this trip. It will have a historical trek that's different every year. This is like one of my favorite events. Next year will be its 50th anniversary. I think they're all staying in Virginia City next year. There's about 1,200 senior humbugs. No, excuse me, about 1,500 senior humbugs right now. I'd say probably 1,000 of them are alive. As noted earlier, California was home to all Clamper chapters until 1963, when Julius C. Blett was formed in Virginia City. A credit to Marsh Bay for the following paragraph. In 1959, the Snowshoe Thompson chapter of ECB, based out of Margaretville but operating in Reno, placed a plaque honoring the centennial of the discovery of the Comstock lode. This plaque is located in the Delta's parking lot. In 1962, the stars of the TV show Bonanza, Van Cartwright, Haas, and Little Joe, were duly initiated in Virginia City, plus numerous other PBCs who later become the nucleus of our future chapter. The late Louis Beaupre, a clamper since 1959, who actually came from Washington, D.C., was a Virginia City resident and our first humbug. He advocated that Virginia City should have a chapter. Since Clamp Redivivus in 1931, chapters only had been sanctioned in California. As an initiative was spawned on a very chilly morning on January 11, 1963, 12 members of the Snowshoe chapter met at the Bucket of Blood for the purpose of forming a new chapter. Jim Lydon was the goldest receiver. There had been ample quantities of 100-proof beneficial juices dispenses. Louis was the barkeep, and it necessitated adjournment. They gathered the next day at the old Washoe Club to quench a new thirst and finish the petition questioning chapterhood. They needed ammunition, so in February they coerced the Nevada legislature to pass a resolution stating that Virginia City should have a chapter. Later in the month, Governor Grant Sawyer, already a clamper, signed the petition. On June 1st, 1963, they bamboozled the Grand Council of ECV, convening in Murphys, California, to award the first Nevada chapter. The first doing was a month later on July 6th in Virginia City. They had a tremendous turnout. The first annual plaque was naturally to Julia C. Blett. The first humbugs were Louis Beaupre, Marsh Fay, who recently has passed, I'm sorry to say, John Dufresne, who died while in office, and Jim Lydon, who finished Dufresne's term as humbug and then did his own year. He's kind of like my source for chapter trivia right now. Louis, like I said, was from Washington, D.C. His father was in the Coast Guard, and Louis had a pilot's certificate before he even had a driver's license. He served at the tail end of World War II and was a meteorologist. We all know Marsh Bay with his magnificent accomplishments. What amazes me about Marsh is how he did things. He and his brother Frank ran a very successful, busy restaurant with its main menu item being prime rib. It was directly in competition with casino restaurants that were practically giving prime rib away. Even though he was running a restaurant, he found time to research and author books, collect antiques, raise a family, and devote time to the clampers. Even in the 90s, on a scouting trip up in the Donner Summit, he'd say, "Hey, Tim, behind that tree, you'll find a trail marker." He was that sharp. I certainly miss him. John Dufresne worked at Pacific Fruit Company in Sparks. He was a refrigeration mechanic. Train cars of fruit from California would stop in Sparks and he'd be packed in ice. He met a gal at a clamper dance and died. Kind of absurdium. Jim Lydon came to Reno in 1948. Jim worked with money, whether it was a casino or a bank. The upcoming chapter voted him to become the first Gold Dust receiver for JCB. He could count well. He raised 12 kids. At a funeral, Jim was the pallbearer, and while maneuvering the casket, he fell in the hole. He got out and now swears there were footprints on his back. Anyway, Virginia City chapter, Julia C. Blett, number 1864, is in its 61st year and remains one of the premier chapters of the ancient and honorable order of E Clampus Vitus. I'm moving on to our chapter alone. Clamper chapters are usually named after a person of historical fame. Louis Beaupre was the one that came up with the idea of naming it after Julia Blett. There had been very little written about Julia, probably because there was very little known about her. Some accounts credit her with living in Liverpool, England, by the way of New Orleans. And another new biography of her tells us that she was born in Mississippi and moved to New Orleans. We're certain, though, that she did come from New Orleans, where she may have begun her career. Ladies of the Night often adopted a stage name. More than likely, she was not born Julia C. Villette. Like other ladies of the night, Julie did go to the gold fields of California and ply her trade. She may have traveled from town to town as different gold strikes prevailed. When the gold was played out in California, a new strike in Nevada drew her and others to the silver state to seek their fortunes. Thus, Julia arrived in Virginia City in 1863 to work. Prostitutes were not thought of as bad at the time, other than by other ladies. She was one of the first here in Virginia City, and by 1875, there was an estimated 300 ladies of the night living in Virginia City. When she first came to Virginia City, she became very popular. She was a benevolent soul. She gave much of her money to widows and disadvantaged people. She was well loved in Virginia City. Some accounts cite Jewel as being a madame who was very wealthy, but this is hardly the truth. While Julie didn't work out of a crib or a back room of a hotel, she did have her own cabin, and it was at the corner of Union and D Streets. She was by no means wealthy or well off. It was unheard of back then for a woman to volunteer to help firemen, but Julie did, and she quickly became a favorite of Virginia City's Fire Engine Company number 1. She was so popular with them that she was elected an honorary member in return for numerous favors and magnificent gifts bestowed upon her by the company. The Territorial Enterprise noted Villette's enthusiastic support of the fire department and her presence at fires where she worked the brakes of the handcart engines. Julia Villette was not an average courtesan. On January 20th, 1867, tragedy struck. Julia C. Villette was brutally murdered that early Sunday morning in her cabin. She died of strangulation from blows from a blunt instrument to the right temple and right eye. Her death caused quite a sensation. Julie's funeral was held on Monday at 3 p.m. Reverend William Martin delivered the services, and a parade was held down C Street. 60 firemen from Engine Company number 1 led the parade. The turnout was large, although some of the men must have been kept at home by their wives. John Mullane was later caught when he tried to sell. John Mullane, a Frenchman, was later caught when he tried to sell some of Julie's possessions that he had stolen the night he murdered her. He later was found to have sold Julie's property all over Virginia City and Gold Hill. He professed innocence until his death, never admitting to the murder. Mullane was tried and convicted for the murder of Julie and was hanged on April 24th, 1868. The hanging spectacle was attended by over 4,000 people. People brought their kids, they packed a lunch, they spent the day. Mark Twain witnessed the hanging and wrote the following account. I saw a man hanged the other day, John Mullane of France. He was the first man ever hanged in this city or county. Ever were the first 6 graves in the cemetery were those men who died by shots and stabs. I had never witnessed an execution before and did not believe I could be present at this one without turning my head at the last moment. But I did not know what fascination there was about this thing. And only I went because I thought I ought to have a lesson, and because I believed that if ever it would be possible to see a man hanged and derive satisfaction from the spectacle, this was it. For John, Mullane was no common murderer. He was a heartless assassin. A year ago, he secreted himself under the house of a woman of the town who lived alone, and in the dead of night, he entered a room, knocked her senseless with a billet of wood that she slept, and then strangled her with his fingers. He carried off all her money, her watches, and every article of her wearing apparel. The next day, with quiet effrontery, put some crepe on his arm and walked in a funeral procession. This is the man I wanted to see hung. I joined the appointed physicians so that it might be admitted with the charmed circle and be close to Mylene. Now I never shall be surprised at anything. That assassin got out of the closed carriage, and the first thing his eye fell upon was the awful gallows towering above a great sea of human heads. Thunder on the hillside, and his cheek never blanched, and never a muscle quivered. He strode firmly away, skipped gaily up the steps of the gallows like a happy girl. He looked around at the people calmly examining the gallows with a critical eye and with pleased curiosity of a man who sees them for the first time, a wonder he has often heard of. He swallowed frequently, but there was no evidence of trepidation about him, and not the slightest air of braggadocio whatever. He prayed with the priest, then he drew out an abusive manuscript and read about it in a clear, strong voice without a quiver in it. It was a broad, thin sheet of paper, and he held it apart in front of him as he stood. If ever his hand had trembled, even in the slightest degree, it never quivered that paper. I watched him at the sickening moment when the sheriff was fitting the noose about his neck and pushing the noose this way and that way, and that to get it nicely adjusted to the hollow under his ear, as if measuring Mylene for a shirt. He could not have been more perfectly serene. I never saw anything like that before. My own suspicion was unbearable, but blood was leaping through my veins, and my thoughts were crowding and trampling upon each other. 20 minutes to live, 15 to live, 10 to live, 5, 3, heaven and earth. The time galloped, and yet that man stood unmoved, and he knew that sheriff was reaching deliberately for the drop, while the black cap descended over his quiet face. Then down through the hole in the scaffold, the strap around the figure shot like a dart. A dreadful shiver started at the shoulders, violently convulsed through the whole body all the way down, and died away with a tense drawing of his toes downward like a doubled fist, and it was all over. That was Mark Twain's account of it. So Julia, even though a courtesan, was chosen as our namesake for her generous support of one of the fire department and her generosity to help people in need. She had died in debt. The JCB chapter is set up like most chapters with the following list of officers. The names are unlikely. They're unlike any other organization, keeping us in the tradition of fun. They are named as follows. Noble Grand Humbug, he's chief in charge. Vice Noble Grand Humbug. He assists the humbugs and supervises all committees, but we usually find him to be very confused. Grand Noble Recorder. He keeps the minute, addresses, and etc. Now we just record them on a phone. Gold Dust Receiver. He keeps track of the coin. Hangman, he's in charge of the 601s. So he's in charge of the work parties, cleaning up the hall, our building, and other things. Grand Musician, he's the head barkeep. Roisterous Escutus, that's the head cook. Royal Platrix is the first assistant cook. Royal Petrix is the first assistant bar. Clamps Matrix is the second assistant bar. Clamps Vitrix is the second assistant cook. Damn Fool Doorkeep, number 1, is the assistant to the Gold Dust, and Damn Fool Doorkeep, number 2, is the assistant to the Hangman. And the 601s, they're the volunteers, they're the workhorses that keep it all together. JCB also has a clamp historian. That's pretty self-explanatory. He's here with us. His name is Jeff Johnson. I mentioned at a Graybeards meeting one time that we needed a cyber scribe. Everybody voted on it, and it was thought a good idea. So we created the Office of Cyberscribe. He's the master of the interwebs. He's here with us right now. We have a hawker. He's in charge of the sales of all merchandise. He's the same guy as the Cyberscribe. And the Clamp Patrick, would be last year's humbug. Graybeards, they have a meeting every year, and they're actually the voice of the ECV on what happens with the chapter. It's a collection of ex-humbugs, opinions, and endless ideas. Julia's candle has a candle of yearly events. We parade a lot. Virginia City will throw a parade just because it's Wednesday, and we, like most every other chapter, won't miss a good chance to participate. JCB puts forth every effort to be good members of the community. We have yearly scholarship fund that we give to the class valedictorian of the local high school. Our contribution is the largest of any organization in Virginia City. Even though it's not our prime focus, we donate items for auctions and used for other charities. We mount a plaque yearly. Last year, we placed 5 plaques. Our plaques are now made of granite due to problems with vandalism of bronze. So you'll see our plaques are black granite with white lettering. They'll usually have an ECB logo on it, and they're placed. They're placed all around Reno and Virginia City. We have once a month or so. We have a social with. I don't know how this got in. We have a social with Earl Grey to discuss politics and religion and cats. Thanks, Ellie. That's my wife. We have 2 initiations a year. One is for the elderly or handicapped, and the other one is for the average man. Look for us in late June in BC. You'll see us parading down Main Street with a line of PBCs holding a row. I remember when I went in, a young mother of 2 spotted us coming up a hill to start the parade, and she went full mother hen on us. Arms went straight down to protect each child as she shouted to them in a panicky state, "I don't know what they did, but don't get close to them." I never laughed so darn hard. Our calendar is filled with monthly meetings that also include a history lesson. We have a dance that we bring our wives or girlfriends to. We try to make for all the weekends we went. It tries to make up for all the weekends we went clamping. Our most fun event is the junk truck. It was created by Gino Oliver, past proctor, ex-Noble Grand Humbug. It's called Julius Unequivocal. It stands for Julius Unequivocal Nevada Clampout. We will visit sometimes very remote sites. We camp out for the weekend on Saturday, and on Saturday are led on a trek of all the historic sites in the area by the Noble Grand Humbug. He's the one that chooses the area, the clamp. There is a book written by the clamp historian which accompanies the trek that explains what happened along the way. It's a great time, and I've discovered a lot of remote Nevada and its history out there. In Virginia City, between the Knights of Pythias Hall and the Miners' Union, there was a long, narrow piece of land with ruins. No sidewalls existed. The roof was gone. The building, if you could call it one, had been vacant for 30 years. The Graybeards of Julia agreed to buy this land for the sum of $3,000 and made their purchase in 1969. This was a lot of money at the time because the usual rub or fee to get into a function was $10 at the time. It was finally paid off 3 years later. All the work on the building was done by volunteers. Norm Bucky installed the first 4 walls with cinder block purchased by the chapter. Danny Costello, Noble Grand Humbug 1993, who worked at the Martin Iron Works, donated rebar for the block walls. Dale Turney, Noble Grand Humbug in 1970, and Sublime Noble Grand Humbug in 1986, that means he was in charge of Grand Council, worked on the plumbing and electrical, and eventually the kitchen. Throughout the years, the sales of stock certificates and other items with little to no value continued to raise money for the building. Gino Oliver and George Corson handled the financials during the first decade. Norm Bucky completed the second floor walls. Gino Oliver and Bill Kennedy and Mike Miller worked on the rafters and roof, which was completed in the 1990s. The cement was finally poured for the ground floor in the late 80s. Daniel Bowers, Noble Grand Humbug 1995, took over with the help of Tom Brophy, attorney, and Rod Stock. Rod Stock was Sublime Noble Grand Humbug 1986. More delays occurred at the Story County Building Department. Initial plans were rejected, and the new plans cost us an extra $1,500. After they were drawn, they were likewise rejected, but subsequently the original plans were approved. By early 1995, the second-story wooden floor was installed. Brophy, a carpenter, and Jim Lyden built the grand staircase. Lyden was also in charge of the balcony construction. Marsh Fay put in the handrail. The first formal event, a Winners Ball, was hosted by Noble Grand Humbug Daniel Bowers. The winners were greeted in 1995 at a grand banquet in late October. The famous photograph piece behind the bar was procured by Bill Sawyer from Harold's Club collection. Since the grand opening, the brothers have added a great deal of ECV memorabilia, including artwork of famous people from Story County, Washoe County, and Carson City. The building is completed now, but we always add improvements. It is truly a treasure to visit. Our chapter does very well. We were blessed with the gift of the building by our graveyards, and it has helped in funding numerous plaques. To raise money in 2023, we barreled 5 gallons of moonshine into white oak barrels and let them sit for a year. We did this through Highmark Distillery. Each barrel was named after one of the first 5 humbugs of the chapter. In 2024, we tapped the barrels and bottled them. It is some of the finest bourbon on the planet. It commemorates our 60th anniversary as a chapter, and all the taxes have been paid, so the revenues aren't after us. If you would like a bottle, get a hold of a clamper. We are a brotherhood that will never raise a fist at one another, never steal from each other, and we certainly will never lie to each other. And if you believe that, you'll never make it. Oh, I forgot who said it, but if you're not placking, you're not clamping. That's probably the end of my presentation here. It's a great organization. We have a blast. We have a great time. I guess I got about 6 minutes left. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing about your colorful history of your organization. I appreciated learning more about the organization. We do not have any virtual questions at this time. I'll wait a few minutes or a few, short period. If there is any virtual questions, please enter them now.
Let me tell you about St. Vitus in the meantime.
Okay.
St. Vitus was a patron saint of actors, comedians, dancers, and epileptics. He was born in Sicily to father of high stature, so he was a pagan. He was educated in Christian faith. From the moment of his conversion, he began to perform miracles. To avoid persecution, his nurse and teacher hid him in the Lusitania region. Diocletian, emperor of Rome, a staunch pagan, had a son that was thought to be possessed and had involuntary body movements. Vitus moved to Rome to cure him of what was probably epilepsy. At the age of 12, Vitus cured his son. Diocletian, having found out that Vitus was a Christian, offered him a chance to convert to paganism, which was refused. He was sentenced to death. At the age of 12, he was thrown into a boiling hot vat of oil with a rooster. And this is why St. Vitus is known to help early risers. And if you believe that.
It does look like Neal has a question.
Yeah, the different roadside markers that you've got, they have a concrete base and then a stone decorated pier, and of course, one of the beautiful plaques. To go ahead and get permission from the highway department or the state to go ahead and put these up, the trials and tribulations of being able to get out there and get these wonderful historical markers placed and, of course, built. Can you elaborate just a little bit on that, Tim?
Yeah, the state of Nevada is kind of hard to deal with on the plaques next to a highway. The city of Reno, I went to a meeting at their historic commission. Jeff Johnson and Marsh Fay were in attendance, and we had already engraved the plaque and wanted to place it in front of the train station downtown Reno. And they actually were pretty supportive. It took a lot of paperwork, and at one time I thought it wasn't going to happen because I got a call at 10 o'clock in the morning to be down at a council meeting. And there was a lot going on at that council meeting. So I sat there for a few hours, and all they wanted to do was thank me for the plaque. I thought that was wonderful. So the city of Reno is pretty easy to get along with. You know, they had your hoops and hurdles, and the council had voted for the plaque. So, I mean, I think every city has their hoops and hurdles. So, as far as other plaques, we like to put plaques on private buildings because on the wall of a private building, because that makes it a lot easier. But sometimes you just can't do that. I would have wanted to put that one on the railroad station, and we have yet to add a plaque to the back of that monument. And that's probably in the works this year.
Tim, is there a
Thanks for the
list of plaques and where they're at?
Pardon me?
Is there a list of where the plaques can be found?
Yes, there is.
ecvplaques.com.
ecvplaques.com.
And also, can organizations apply to ECV for assistance, or do they decide who to help on their own?
Well, if an organization wants, or if somebody wants a plaque, we don't have a application process, but if somebody asks to have a plaque and we find that it's a good historical value, we will put a plaque up there. And it's usually on us. It's always on us, you know. So I mean, that's what we're about. I have a plan. Probably shouldn't tell you this, but we're going to do a lot of plaques the year after next. We're going to probably do more plaques than any other chapter in 1 year.
And
So,
Hey, Tim, Marsh Bay had always done these out in the field field trips wouldn't be the proper term there, like going over Donner Summit and tracking important places. And he knew where everything was, but he was in multiple other places throughout the state of Nevada. Do the Clampers have any kind of a group that will be able to show historical events of any kind that took place in the area?
Well,
Or was he just, that was just Marsh?
Marsh wrote three different editions of Immigrant Trails. He also wrote 6 different editions of the Slot Machine book, and he wrote the manuals on how to fit Valley, Jennings, and there was another slot machine manufacturer there. I forget what it is. Anyway, I mean, the guy was busy. He was always on the run.
Yeah.
I've been on scouting trips with him, and the trash trek that he created is when you go, we have a central campsite, and then we go around to the areas where historical events happened in that area. It's just like our junk trip that Gino Oliver created. And it'd be really hard to trace where Marsh Bay has been because that guy never stopped. You know, and he actually remembered, you know, like I said in my presentation, he remembered, you know, where every marker was, you know. I mean, that he hadn't been there in 30, 40 years, and he'd say, oh, that's behind that tree, too. Go look.
But there would be nothing really in the works right now to bring the public in and be able to take them on these field trips and show them what you've learned from Marsh or what you knew yourself about the state.
You know,
Get-
never
get-
really thought of that. That's actually a very good idea.
So,
That's really a good idea.
well, I want to thank you for taking the time and effort and elaborate as far as the long-reached history of E Clampus Vitus. I am in hopes that we're going to have another spot for you or two. So I'm talking about Ollie and Westerners. So you've got it all together now. You can tighten her up or expand it out or whatever. But I very much enjoyed this, and I hope the rest of the audience was as tuned in as I was. So, Tim, thanks from the bottom of my black little heart.
Thank you, Neal. I appreciate that. It was a lot of fun putting together. Done.
Thank you. We have one last question. Someone asked, do local chapters work together to mark a historical site, or does each chapter do their own?
Actually, we do actually work together. There's a new chapter here in Reno called, or not in Reno, but out of Lovelock called 1422. And we got together with with them for a plaque in Washoe Valley, of all things, the old Washoe Cemetery last year. And we get together with Snowshoe Thompson every once in a while. We're having plans on plaquing the old Nevada State Prison. So, I mean, it's something we do all work together. You know, once you're a clamper, you can go to any other clampers meeting or functions. You know, I mean, you're part of the whole group body. Yeah, so we work together on a lot of things. We just had a 7-way chapter, 7-chapter doings. There was like 500 guys there. And that was down in Belmont, Nevada. That was a ghost town down there. We had a blast. It was a lot of fun. So, yeah, I mean, that happened, about a month ago. So we do work with other chapters all the time.
Thank you. Well, with that, it looks like we're just about out of time. So I'm going to send it over to Jennifer for final comments.
Very good. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Clamper historian Tim Pearce, Christina Hornback, and Neal Cobb with the Nevada Historical Society, and to Tim, this month's Washoe County Library System Tech Wizard, for making this event possible today. Thank you very much.